Well, Tim, thank you so much for doing this. Super
It's a
excited
pleasure.
to talk to you. Our podcast is about your journey in music. I know you have an extensive acting career and comedy, but music is always kind of there, especially with your live act.
Uh,
But I want to talk about, your journey in music, and especially about this new record, because I feel like this new record is an album of all just, serious music, right? It doesn't have that comedy undertone to it.
no, I mean it's a serious. For me, it's not much of a departure because I've always written songs, and even my live shows always trod that line where sometimes it was a bit dark and sometimes it was unironic. But yeah, as soon as the opportunity finally came around for me to record in a studio, I knew that I wasn't going to be throwing down punchlines because they belong on stage, and I think making a studio album is a totally different experiment.
And it's beautiful. I mean, the first song, it reminds me a lot of like just how the record opens. Do you know the band Porcupine Tree? I don't know.
No, I don't.
There's the guy that he's a producer for this big metal band called Opeth, but he's a very like his band sounds nothing like it. They're called Porcupine Tree, but it has that very like it just gives me the same kind of feel like
Oh, wicked! I'll look
yeah
into it.
they're an incredible band. But
Yeah,
it just
Porcupine
has
Tree.
it definitely gives me that vibe when I heard it. I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. It reminds me of that.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, Summer Romance is the old second oldest song on the record. Like, there's only two songs on the record that I didn't kind of write for the record. I went through the
Oh,
vault and decided what I wanted to put on it. And Summer Romance is written 10 years ago when I was in London. And it's hugely with Daniel Denholm's strings, and it's epic and
mm-hmm.
totally unironic. It's deliberately I mean, there's still some quirky lyrics there, umbrella-less but undefeated, and all those word games I constantly play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I once we had all the tracks down and we were trying to decide on the album order, because people of my generation still care about album order. I still
Sure.
think of
Yeah.
the album as a journey that I'm taking. Just like when I think very hard with my live shows, I'm thinking very carefully about what dynamic journey I'm taking the audience on, both in terms of topics and musicality and vibe and all that. And I thought, if I'm going to put out a studio album that is not as playful as my live stuff, I should just come out totally state my intent. I'm
Sure.
completely unironic mega pop song.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the record twists and turns and has plenty of quirky lyrics in it, and
Right.
plenty of that self-referential, self-deprecating, overly wordy stuff. But I just thought I'd come out with a statement of intent, of unironic intent.
Yeah, I love that you used epic. That's the word I was looking for when I was trying to reference it to like Porcupine Tree. It just has that like epic sound. Like you're like, wow, I'm getting into something here. Like, and it wasn't obviously it's not what your true to form
Known
stuff
for.
is, but
Yeah,
it's amazing.
and I want to make music part. I'm my career ranges from musical theater and writing for family and children's through to very, very offensive comedy in the eyes of some people. But one thing I haven't got to do that I really seized the opportunity to do with this record is Wall of Sounded. I mean, this album, mostly, especially Summer Romance and Absence of You and the bigger tracks, just the louder you play it, the better it is. It's made to be played really fucking loud, and
Totally.
and it's got all those layers that it's not. People are creating huge sounds these days with like 4 tracks of digitally generated stuff, and I love all that. But the kind of slightly more organic, if you want a big sound, let's get in 30 orchestral players. Let's have 4 French horns and 15 violins. And I mean, I love the theatricality of that, and I like employing musicians, not just robots, to make my music with me.
Oh, that's cool. So you would just hire all those players instead of having the computer essentially make the French horn sound or whatever.
It's an opportunity to engage in a collective process. I mean, music's always been about that for me, especially coming from a theater background. It's like, let's all get together and make big noises.
That's awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about you. Where I did read that you're born in England, but you moved to Australia pretty early on in life, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I was born to Australian parents. My dad was in Northampton in England studying surgery. So I was born during the time that Dad was over there getting his fellowship at the Royal College of Surgeons. And but they immediately went back home as soon as that was done. So I was basically the result of a study break.
Wow. The result of a study break.
Yeah.
What type of surgery did he?
They reckon I was conceived on a train between London and Edinburgh, actually, which is both disgusting and joyous. It's not disgusting at all. In fact, I think being conceived on a train is very salubrious. I like it.
That's a great story too. I mean, I don't think I have that cool. I don't even want to ask my parents that story.
it really evokes a picture. It's very evocative. It's like I'm there.
So your dad was a doctor, a surgeon. What type of surgery does he do, if you don't mind me? As I wear this neck brace.
Oh yeah, nice. He's not an ortho.
Okay.
He studied what was called general surgery back then. I don't know if there's such thing now as general surgery, but there was kind of, you could be a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon or a pediatric surgeon or whatever, but general surgery was just sort of the rest. So my dad did. And then he specialized. He did a lot of, little things like varicose veins and stuff, but then a heap of bowel cancer and breast cancer and all that. Yeah. And then was one of the first people in Australia to do laparoscopic cholecystectomy, which was when keyhole surgery with cameras first came in the late 80s or whatever it was. He was taking out gallbladders with cameras and stuff, and and then he got into thyroids.
That's amazing.
Pretty happening.
Yeah, that's cool. Good. That's really cool. Wow. Okay, so then they took you back to Australia. You're raised in Australia. And how did you get into music? With your dad being? Did you say your mom was a doctor as well, or surgeon as well?
No, mum was mostly a mum. I mean, she's done a lot of things, but I'm one of 4 kids. So when I was born in England, my brother already pre-existed me, and then got 2 little sisters. And I don't know. There's music in our family. My mum's brothers are muso, and not that we were hugely close to him growing up, because he was a pretty wild muso and had a pretty wild life. And we come from a very, very straighty 180 family. So we didn't see much of him while he was doing his thing. But I do have very early memories of watching him play bluegrass and rock and roll in local pubs. Oh, cool. My other uncles owned pubs, so I'd often be in their pubs. And but the real reason I'm a muso is my brother, because he played guitar and was just really into music and loved listening and figuring out. So we're in Perth in the 80s. We're listening to Hoodoo Gurus and Crowded House and In Excess and all these Oz rock pub bands, really, and not so much AC/DC, like not so much the hard rock, but just this sort of pop rock that was really big in Australia that you guys probably didn't get a lot of. But it was huge for him. And really, I did a few piano lessons when I was a kid, like middle class people do, and then I quit at grade 2 or something. Grade 2 piano, and then I don't know whether I would have kept playing, but my brother was just like, "Oh, have you heard this? Have you heard this? Oh, can you learn the?" He'd be like, we're getting into the Doors and going, "Can you learn the?" Can you teach yourself the intro to Light My Fire? And because he wanted me to play with him. And then we started writing songs together, and then he kind of, didn't focus on music as much, and I went and did my thing. But
Wow.
I'd never been a music consumer, and he was the one. Half the songs I know, I just know because Dan taught them to me, not because I heard them.
You wanted to play something that had a key part.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why all my influences, if I look at all my big influences, as I say, I didn't listen to Led Zepp, I listened to Deep Purple, because of course it had John Lord doing all his B3 stuff. And I listened to Doors because I had all that, and Queen and the Beatles, and anything that was a bit more harmonically moving around, because that suits keys players. But yeah, without Dan, there's no way I'd be in music, because I wasn't that. I remain not a very good music fan.
Yeah, mainly he was bringing you the influences, like, hey, can you learn this so I could play it with you? So
yeah, totally.
Well, with that, obviously, I mean, you kept playing piano. So from this grade 2 piano to playing with your brother, was he just giving you more and more music to learn? And when did it change to writing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I basically can play because I've taught myself to play through writing. So it's like, I started writing songs at 11 or something. Like the first thing I did when I gave up piano and worked out that rather than trying to read music, it was much more fun to just play chords. And once I worked that out, as soon as I knew 2 chords, I wrote a song with 2 chords. And then once I knew 4 chords, I wrote a song with 4 chords. And then when I discovered major 7, I wrote a song with major 7 chords. And then when people started listening, especially when I started doing comedy in my late 20s, I went, oh God, people are listening to me, and I want to write these songs. This song would be funny if it was a waltz, if it was like a classical waltz, but it's about how you want to, like, you're so frustrated with your baby, you want to, it's quite dark unless it's in the song. Anyway, and so I just had to teach myself. I just had to, all that stuff. I just learnt because I wanted to be able to write it. So I was just writing myself into further skills. But all the dexterity and stuff just comes from the blues, just because very early on, I just always wanted to be able to, like, show off and play the blues. So that's what I did.
Well, you were writing with your brother, playing with your brother. Did you guys have a band or anything, like, going through primary school?
Yeah, well, I think, when was my first band was with my brother's mate. So he'd try and get a band together. He's quite a nerd, my brother. Like, he wasn't cool. We've never been cool. I mean, can you tell? Like, we're super uncool. And Dan was trying to play in bands and stuff, but he wasn't really cool. So he'd get a few friends, and he had his mate Mike, who played guitar, and Ollie, who played bass, and he'd go, my brother can play keys, and he'd bring me into his bands. And initially, like so many, we'd be trying to play Cream songs or Doors songs, or guitar driven stuff that could also involve a keyboard. But we started writing originals quite young, and kind of crossing over the way everyone does. I guess I was in ninth grade or something, like middle school, and we had, the band name changed every few weeks the way it does. I think we were called the Frisians. At one point we were called Flaming Archipelago. And
that's
then
a pretty good name.
and then our band was called Arnold. And then eventually we had a band called Timmy the Dog, and it was Timmy the Dog made a record that we made in our share house when we were at uni.
Oh.
Well, no, I was 25 when we made that record, so it was in our 20s, and it's okay. and it, and it's certainly the origin of where I've ended up, because half the songs were funny and half of them weren't, and all that.
So was that I think I've found it online. Is it Sit? Is that the album?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't see the music, but it just shows that you put that record out. And now you said we're half comedy songs and half originals, or half
this is
not
the trouble.
funny.
This is the trouble. It wasn't clear what it was,
Mm-hmm.
So I've always written ironic lyrics and sometimes a bit sweary, and when I shopped that record around, it's just a glorified demo, really.
Mm-hmm.
I got some really good feedback, but the American labels especially went, "Is this what are we listening to here? Is this a novelty act?" And I'm like, "No, it's not a fucking novelty act. Sure. Is calling it a novelty, will that help me sell records? Whatever.
Right. I will
tell
become
me
one.
what I am." Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And definitely part of my journey is that I moved from West Australia to Melbourne, the big smoke, in 2002, and part of the reason I ended up doing comedy, which got me back into theatre and all that, and I come from I was composing for theatre from 17, right? So
okay.
the bit of the journey that sort of gets lost in this narrative is that I'm a theatre guy, I was writing music for youth theatre and uni theatre all through my late teens and early 20s. And so when I moved to Melbourne with the Timmy the Dog record, trying to get a record deal, and I was also trying to act and all that, the feedback that I got was this, I don't know if you're a novelty actor or not. And I was like, well, I tell you what, I'll go do a little cabaret show where I do all my quirky, funny stuff. And I'll put that over there, and then I'll get back to making serious music, I'll get the comedy off my chest. And then that getting comedy off my chest took me on a 17-year-long journey to playing with orchestras in the Royal Albert Hall and opening musicals on Broadway and acting in stupid blockbuster films, and ended this year with the release of Apart Together. That journey of one day I'll get back to just writing songs. The distraction which I thought would take 7 months took 17 years.
That is crazy. Yeah. Well, with that journey though, with the comedy, and then with that first record, I should say, with the Timmy the Dog record, like you said, some of them were comedy based, some of them were more just ballads and not comedy oriented. Like you said, you're a comedian. Like, were you doing stand-up shows and stuff while writing? Like, how did you kind of intertwine that, or like how did you realize that you're funny and
I never did stand up. I never did 5 minutes here in a club and 5 minutes there. I just started putting all my quirky stuff in a show. Like the thing I identify as my first real comedy show was in the Melbourne Fringe Festival in 2003. It was called Naval Cerebral Melodies with Umbilical Chords. And it was just a cabaret show, and it was 90 minutes long or 70 minutes long or something. So, and there was a poem in it, and some of the songs I still play on stage, like Dark Side was in it, Rock and Roll Nerd was in it.
Oh, wow.
There was a beat poem in it that, I did beat poetry for years. That the most sort of well-known one I wrote is called Storm, which is which was the last one I wrote, which was kind of like, this is what I believe about the world. And it had all this stuff in it, and little sketches, little weird accompanied sketches where I was like a character who worked in a waxing salon, like it was totally just kind of fringe cabaret. And people just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I wasn't totally unaware that was in me, because I'd done lots of improv and lots of theatre and lots of gigs. And I knew that when I was on a microphone on stage, my fallback position was comedy, I guess, in the broadest sense, to be funny. That was my kind of my instinct. But they just really laughed. And as soon as I heard that audience laughing, I went, oh, well, I'll just keep doing this. And I kept calling it cabaret for a couple of years. And then when I went to Melbourne Comedy Festival in 2005, I went, well, I'm just going to stop calling it cabaret because I think it stops people coming.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the year that just went absolutely fucking bonkers.
That's when it blew up for you.
That's when it blew up.
Do you remember was there a defining moment that happened?
Well, so Comedy Festival in Melbourne Comedy Festival is one of the biggest comedy festivals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I had in my head already that that I'd like to get to Edinburgh Fringe, which is the biggest, fringe and comedy festival in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But Melbourne Comedy Festival is 4 weeks and you play every night. And I had very few people, and then a few more people, and a few more people got some good reviews.
Mm-hmm.
This amazing lady who runs the ticketing booth at Melbourne Comedy Festival started telling people to come. And then on the second last night, the director of the Melbourne Festival, who had largely not really taken any notice of me whatsoever,
mm-hmm.
and this is all self-funded, doing my own flyering,
mm-hmm.
I had at that point some other people helping, but on the second last night, the Melbourne Comedy Festival director and one of the venue operators from Edinburgh, a scout, came and saw my show. And that was the moment where things changed, because then I went to Edinburgh and someone dropped out. So Karen, the Edinburgh venue operator, had to put me in her biggest venue, which, by the way, is only 350 seats. But for a total newcomer, that was unheard of. You don't put a newcomer in Edinburgh. You put them in a 50-seater, because it's a massively overpopulated festival. And I said to her, I'm only coming if you can get me a grand piano. I don't want to play on keyboards. I need to get the status of this thing right.
Mm-hmm.
And that festival in August 2005 in Edinburgh, I came as a totally unheard of act and left with a DVD deal and a promoter wanting to tour me and the best agent in the country. And, that was the moment.
That's amazing. And I love that you stuck your guns and were like, I want the grand piano. This is going to be it. And do you
I was
use
lucky
the grand piano at all your shows?
Still? Still. Well, now I don't need it, because the grand piano was like all about status. My comedy shows were all about, like, I was wearing makeup and looking like a sort of mad professor.
Yeah.
And playing like, I'm good enough to make people who don't know better think I'm good. As in,
you're really good.
That's a terrible thing to say. What I mean is I'm good enough. It's not common to go see a comedy show and have someone playing the instrument. Like, it's why I've never been comfortable calling myself a comedian, because it's just, I'm not a musical comedian. I'm a musician, like, it's so. Anyway,
you're musicians. That's funny.
It does. None of that matters. But what does matter is what the audience is feeling. And when someone's playing the fuck out of a grand piano, but then is swearing and talking about how God doesn't exist, like that's where the comedy begins,
right?
Because it's high status, low status, and comedy is always about a clash between high status and low status. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
Well, yeah, that's cool. I mean, so from that point on, you get the DVD deal, you get the tour, and with that, were you just touring that show that you had created for the comedy festival?
No, I mean, you immediately. I mean, I went back to Australia. I did a bunch of gigs, but I immediately had to start creating my next show for the next round of festivals, because that's kind of how it works. You kind of create a new show every year until you get big enough that you don't have to do that. And so I immediately went back to Australia after Edinburgh. My wife was pregnant. She was pregnant, and we lost a pregnancy during all this time. Then we went back and got pregnant again. And then I did a few shows in London and then back to Australia trying to write a new show. Then Melbourne again in 2006. And then Sarah, 6 months pregnant, and I packed up our entire lives and moved to London in 2006, did another Edinburgh Fringe. And from that moment on, I was touring. And the shows I was touring were amalgamations of all the material I'd kind of generated. And then, oh man, I mean, it was a crazy, I really only concentrated on comedy for about 6 years, all up. But it was bonkers. I mean, it wasn't bonkers at the time. It's just life. You got a job, and I was very grateful, and we were having kids and all those challenges of being away from our family, and all along, like, it's Christmas here coming up, and there it's Christmas, and my Christmas song, which I wrote 14 years ago today virtually, is like now one of the best known Christmas songs in Australia. And I wrote, and it makes people cry buckets, and I wrote that in the middle of my first year of comedy. So even though I got known as a comedian, I never stopped writing songs that make people cry. I mean, it's literally what I do. My specialty is making songs that make you laugh 1 second and cry the next, and making TV shows that make you laugh 1 second and cry the next, and writing theatre that makes you laugh 1 second and cry. That's kind of become my thing.
Wow. And the song, the Christmas song is White Wine in the Sun.
Yeah.
And I did see, which I love, that you donate the money to autism. And both of my boys are autistic. I have a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old. And when I saw that, I thought that was I wanted to ask you about that. That's so amazing that you do that.
Well, I've ever since I started not being totally poor myself, have been everything I do has, well, not everything I do, but most of what I do has a sort of charity bit to it. So when I tour, I sell the 50 most expensive seats of any venue. When I tour at the moment, I give that money away. So I take the 50 best seats in the house. I charge, VIP rates, which this is the cream that rock stars like to take and spend on cars. I spend that cream on charities, right? So
that's amazing.
So our touring made almost $1 million Australian dollars in the 18 months before Corona for charity, right? And I do that by leveraging my fans' generosity and the demand for my tickets, and so I'm always very interested in how my work can generate charity money as well. And White Wine in the Sun, I started giving money to an autism charity in the UK when I lived over there very early on. I think the second Christmas it existed. And then when I moved to Australia, I changed it to Aspect, which is an Australian autism charity. I have I grew up with a very autistic family member, cousin, but but I have lots of other reasons to be pretty interested in it now. But it's sort of just private stuff. But I'm interested. I try and work with lots of different charities, but White Wine in the Sun just got connected to autism early, so there we are.
I love that. Yeah, because when I first just searched your name, like on Google, your Twitter feed, the one tweet that they're highlighting was the one about giving back between November 1st and January 31st. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I need to remember to ask him about that. And that's
and
so
it's
cool that
you have to do a lot of research when you're giving to autism charities, because there's a lot of differing opinions on. You don't want to give to one that's like no vaccines. But even avoiding those people, which is fine. I understand where that comes from too. But even if you make sure you don't go to a crazy anti-vaxxer one, there's still lots of different ways people think giving to autism. Are you giving to a charity that supports education? Are you giving to a charity that doesn't acknowledge that autistic people are fine as they are? You've got to be. Anyway, Aspect are a great.
I love that,
and they're supporting education. So it's good.
That's so cool. Yeah, we're in California here, and they have a lot of amazing resources here. I mean, not the whole, country doesn't, but there's pockets in certain states that are very good about it. I know Colorado, I believe, is another one that's really good, but California,
super advanced.
California, and like my son, my younger son goes to he's in an autistic preschool that has like half integrated with, non-spectrum kids. It's just, it's been amazing. And just getting him in those groups and around those people. And it's amazing how much they get from it. It's great. And I love that you do that. Well, cool.
That's another whole podcast as well. I'd love to hear more about that next time.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry. Anyway.
No, I want to keep asking about that, but I have to be on another one. But that's really interesting. And good luck with your boys, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been, yeah. But anyway, yeah. So let's
Tiring.
talk about your new record, and then I want to hear. So you're doing comedy. You're doing this thing for a long time. Obviously, you wrote, for musicals and theater,
Yeah.
and you've been on blockbuster shows and television. Why did you decide to put out the studio album?
Well, as I said, it's just like, it was really just every year I couldn't fit it in. And also by the time I got, I was living in LA for 4 years. And by the time we got back to Australia, which had always been the plan, one day we're going to go home,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of, Violet, my daughter, who White Wine in the Sun is about, White Wine in the Sun's about having a kid in England and just having this huge urge to take her home to her family, at Christmas time. And there's a macro version of that project too. So we were always like, by the time Violet's 11, we'll try and be back in Australia. And by the time all that had happened, I mean, it's hard to get heads around. We lived in Melbourne, London, Hollywood, and now Sydney, and we've never lived in Sydney before. And it had just been a hell of a journey. And all along I'd been thinking one day I'll make a studio record, but I just kept getting distracted.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly I'm 40 something and living in yet another city I've never lived in, with kids who are not very happy because we've moved them again. And to be honest, Sarah and I weren't very happy either. It's just hard to keep moving and leaving your friends, and I mean, #blessed and all that, but we were just having a bit of a slump.
Sure.
And my Hollywood project fell over, and I thought, well, this is where you're right. If you're any sort of artist and you're hitting a sort of midlife slump, and you've been on this grand adventure, but you're just taking a moment to reflect, and you're a bit down. And I mean, this is where you're right. That's the fucking point of art, is not to whine or get your feelings off your chest, but to be present to what you're going through and to turn it into something. And in that period of kind of trying to reinvent ourselves, trying to work out who we were now that we were back in Australia, trying to contextualize the madness of the previous 10 years, trying to manage our kids and figure out who our community was. In that period, I really made two things, or contributed to two things. One was this TV show Upright, which is really a show about contextualizing your errors and forgiving yourself for your flaws, and about homecoming and about family and all that sort of thing. And on the other hand was this album Apart Together, which is also about time passing and about what love really means, not what love means in the pop songs. And it's about facing middle age. I mean, I'm 45. I don't know if that's middle age, but there's a lot of death in my record. Not morbidly, but just like, shit, time's passing really fast. Oh my God, am I using it right? Am I spending it right? And so I just sort of thought, this is the time to make some shit. And I'm not really feeling like making comedy at the moment, so I'm not going to. I've never been someone that felt pressured by reputation or past successes to take a particular path. I'm very lucky because of Matilda. Mostly I don't need to do comedy to pay my bills. So I just went, I'm gonna make art that reflects who I am now, not who my audience thought I was 10 years ago. Sure. And this album's just that.
Wow. And wait, did you have the record finished and completed prior to like the whole world shutting down about a year ago?
Yeah.
Or was that something you were working on?
I didn't have all the mixes finished, and I certainly didn't have the music videos made. So COVID ended up doing two things to this record. One, it made the record feel thematically more resonant, because the record's peppered with being away from loved ones and stuff, because as a touring artist, that's a big part of my experience, is wrestling with the pros and cons of being allowed to travel the world like a dickhead. And so suddenly the very title of the record, Apart Together, and the whole record looked more relevant or more resonant.
Yeah.
Which is just an interesting coincidence. And the other thing it did is gave me time to concentrate on it, because I'm always doing 50 things. And I thought, I'll put the record out and then I'll get back to writing my next musical or whatever, or I'll get back to touring. But because everything shut down, it meant I just spent the whole year concentrating on making music videos, on creating really good mixes with Daniel, the producer, and in promoting it. You know, I usually don't have this much time to promote stuff. I wouldn't get to speak to people like you because I just don't have time to do press. But I've done a buttload of press for this, which is really nice to actually go, I'm not just going to drop this into the ocean of music. I'm going to freaking talk about it.
Yeah. And you did say like the first song on the record was a song that you had written before, right? Like it was an older song. What the song, was there a song that you wrote that you were like, okay, now like that kind of got the spark to be like, yeah, I want to put together a record and get it?
I think leaving LA probably made me go, oh yeah, okay, I can, because I didn't know what sort of style I was going to write in, because I've written across all styles, and not all styles, but I've written across all the uncool ones. And I didn't really know what I was going to talk about, because I'm like, you know, who cares? But leaving LA broke the back of it, I think, because you know, it's a quirky sort of love song a love-hate song to a city, and it's got a really funky chorus, and it's still, even though it's like just a pop tune, it's got, you know, on Hollywood and Vine, a dime store Spider-Man shouting at a stoned Emma Stone dressed a la 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 Land. Like, it's got all that overwritten linguistic playfulness that is my stock in trade, like it or not. So yeah, it made me go, oh no, I can write a record that lets me be playful but doesn't oblige me to be punchliney.
Sure. Wow. Is this something that you will continue to do, you think? Put out another studio record that's not?
I certainly don't want to take 20 years to make the next one. I mean, I would like to put out 5 or 6 records in the next 12 years, without a doubt. I think it's really good fun. I think I've pulled it off, you know, like doing what I've tried to do, get known as a comedian, get into musical theatre, become a, you know, serious actor, get into writing telly and selling. I mean, it's like, it's audacious as shit. Like, you know, I don't deserve the career. You know, I'm very, very lucky to have been able to keep sidestepping. And every time I sidestep, I lose some audience and gain some others. And, you know, I don't suppose I'll ever play arenas again unless I just go back to doing broad comedy again. But arenas were never my goal anyway. I want to play theaters. I want to play 3,000 seat max. I don't want to play 10,000 seaters. So my kind of moving towards this place where if people come and see one of my shows, they know it'll make them laugh, they know it'll make them cry, but more than anything, they know I'll do what I fucking want. And what I want will be utterly dedicated to making sure the people in the audience have the best night out ever. But it won't necessarily be what they think it's going to be. You know, like my brand, I want my brand, my name to represent, like, I want people to buy a ticket because they just know it'll be really good, and that I'll put my absolute last drop of sweat and blood into my performance. And, you know, I don't want them to buy a ticket because they're like, oh, he's that guy that does that funny song about gingers. You know, like, I want them to buy a ticket because they know I'll bring something new to the party. And I'm getting there, you know. I think that's where I'm getting in my career. And that's the greatest freedom an artist can have, is an audience who are willing to come with them on whatever journey.
That's amazing. And I did see the video that you did for The Absence of You, which is dope. Yeah, I love it. Was it on like what? It's like one shot. Is it one shot?
Yeah, it's one shot. Did you see? Have a look at type in Absence of You behind the scenes, and you can see how it happened.
Oh, okay. I'll do that when we're done. Okay, that's rad.
Hey, Adam.
Yes.
I am due on another interview about 12 minutes ago.
Oh, Sorry.
No,
I have one question.
it's
Do you
my
mind
fault.
answering?
I
It's
talk
like
too much.
have a sec. Like the last question I have is just: do you have any advice for aspiring artists?
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good question, and I don't give. I'm not very good at giving short answers, which is why my interviews always go long. And I'm certainly not good at giving short answers to this question. But I do think that the best advice I can give, and it's not very fun, is don't get ahead of yourself. You know, like it is not. You're not going to have the best career if you get a pop hit at 18. I mean, you might, but probably not. The vast majority of people who get a pop hit at 18 maybe get another one at 20 and a lesser one at 21, and then they're trying to work out what the hell to do with themselves. Like, what you want to do is get good, and getting good, whatever you think that means, takes years. And if you get success early, then more power to you. And God, I hope you are surrounded by sensible people who tell you what to do with your money and stuff. But don't just concentrate on getting good. And that's the best thing that happened to me, is no one took any notice of me till I was like 30. And because of that, I've got a really, really unusual career that I'm going to be able to keep doing till I'm 70. Because by the time someone took notice of me, I had a bunch of skills. And so just get good. And don't worry about getting famous, or be poor for your 20s. For God's sake, be poor for your 20s. You don't need money in your 20s. Just get good.